and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. Today we're going to be continuing with our lesson in conducting because there's a lot more that I can show you, and it's really quite fascinating. Once you can see a conductor and see what they're doing, it explains a lot in terms of what the orchestra is doing because the orchestra is responding to what the conductor is telling him to do. So what I want to do first is to talk to you about the beat patterns that the conductor uses. He's not just standing there like this, although I have seen some do that. That's because they don't know what they're doing. There is a certain beat pattern. So what usually is going to happen in a formal orchestra concert, what's going to happen is, first of all, the musicians that are already rehearsed, of course, come in and they take their seats. That can be done almost any time. And then the house lights are going to dim. And when the house lights dim, the people understand, and you've done this probably in plays and so forth, you know things are going to begin. That's a signal that they're beginning. And then what they do is the first violinist, usually the first violinist, will stand up. They will tune the orchestra. In fact, that happens before the lights dim. So the musicians take their seats. And then the first violinist, why it's the first violinist, I don't know, but it's been like that for a lot of years. They stand up and so that they're facing the orchestra and they play an A. A is a universal tuning note. And so everybody is tuning to A, and they're tuning to what the violin is doing. It's critical, if the music's going to sound good, that everybody is tuned exactly the same way. But it's difficult sometimes to do it because there are some bands and some orchestras that deliberately sharpen. It's A, but it's a little bit on the sharp side. Not enough to get a half a step sharp, but just enough to get a few vibrations sharp. And so therefore, all of the instruments have to tune a little bit sharp to what the true A is. Now, why should they do that? The faster the vibrations, the higher the pitch, the faster the vibrations of the music, and the faster the vibrations, the more brilliant the sound. So they will deliberately just pitch it a little bit up, and so that if people can do that with their instruments, some instruments are very tunable and there's no problem doing it. Most of the instruments in the orchestra do not have any problems doing it. But some of the instruments that are pre-tuned, like the penny whistles, a lot of the recorders, it's very hard to tune them when you're playing deliberately a little bit off pitch. But some can do it better than others. There are some that can't do it, in which case you'd have to choose another instrument, I guess. But so you tune the orchestra gets tuned. The violinist plays that. You know what's interesting? If you don't have the guitarists, if they're involved, guitarists have little tuners. They can attach them to the instrument. They can play their strings, and it'll tell them when they're in pitch. They just work with it until it's in pitch. If you don't have one of those, you can tune your instrument to a perfect A by picking up a phone that has a dial tone. A dial tone, I don't have it with me here, I guess, but with a dial tone, yes, I do have it with me. The dial tone on top, the dial tone is going to be two notes, and the first note on top is going to be the A. Okay, let me just take a look at this. Does that sound like a dial tone? That top note is going to be an A every time. So it's perfect pitch A, so you could tune an instrument to it. Any instrument that's perfect pitch can be used to tune other instruments. I've tuned other instruments a lot with a recorder or any other instrument that I happen to have. But now everything is so electronic that they get these little tuners and they're always perfect, so you don't have to do it any other way except for the tuners. So the musicians sit down, the violinist tunes them up, and I remember going to concerts in Boston with my father, who was a musician. He studied at the New England Conservatory of Music, and they're playing and playing and playing. And I said to my father, I was pretty young then, every time you take me to a concert, they play this odd song in the beginning, and then he explained to me they're not playing a song, they're tuning up, and that's what it's called, tuning up. That means they're all getting in pitch with each other. And if the violinist does it right, or sometimes it's the conductor that might do it in smaller orchestras, he'll have the violins play the A. Then he'll have all the trumpets play it. Then he tunes the trumpets to each other. Then he'll have the woodwinds do it. And then they will do it to each other. And then finally, they're all playing that same note A. So it really does take a lot of time to tune an orchestra if you're doing it right. So then you see, after the house lights dim and the musicians are seated and they're all tuned up, then the conductor walks in. If they're a soloist, he'll walk in with the soloist. They form a line, a straight line, and they march right in. And then the soloist will sit down in a group of seats right in front of the orchestra, because they're going to stand up and sing when their solos are there. And then but the conductor goes up on the platform where the musicians are, and he stands on a podium. And he has his music stand there, he has his conductor's baton there, and he stands on the podium so he can be seen. Then if he doesn't want to say anything to the audience, he can welcome them, he can do whatever he wants. What he can do is he'll stand there and he will lift his arms. That's a signal to the musicians, we're going to play. If you're a musician with a woodwind, at that point when he's raising his arms, your mouthpiece goes in your mouth. By the time he gets to the top of what's called the upbeat, this would be the upbeat, your mouth it has the mouthpiece in it, or whatever you're playing. You are sitting there, and you're ready to play. Then he gives the downbeat. So it's this, upbeat, downbeat. Now the first measure, the first beat in any measure is always a downbeat. But you have introduction music, sometimes you have an introduction and so forth. So he plays, so he conducts, and he follows the beat pattern. So what I'm going to do now is to show you what the beat pattern is. You have some music that is, you beat only one beat to the measure. If you're doing a march or a very fast waltz, you're not going to do this business. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous. You just play the first beat. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Or you may do 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You notice it's usually not straight down. There's usually a little flourish to it. And different conductors do it in different ways. So one beat is just down and up, down and up. If you do 2 beats to a measure, then it's down, curve it a little, up. Down, curve it a little up. Now what about 3 beats? 3 beats to a measure looks a little like a triangle. It's not exactly, I mean, you could do it as a triangle, but it's a little flourish to it. Down, across, and up. Now I'm sorry that this is probably going to look reversed to you, because TV reverses things, but if I'm going to do a 3-beat, 1, and then I'm going to swing it to the right, the bottom part of the triangle, and then I'm lifting it up. Now, it may look to you like the opposite, but you've got to remember that, like mirror images, things get reversed. Down, across, and up. That's a typical 3 beats, and it's typical waltz tempo. You can also do that for 6/8 time, but 6/8 time can get complicated, and I'll show you the beat pattern in a few minutes. Or if you want to be more strict, this can be used for 3 time, where you get it straight down, to the right and up, straight down, to the right and up. Usually there is some kind of flourish. Some conductors get very artistic about what they're doing when they do the beat patterns, and sometimes you don't have a clue as to what they're trying to do. 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you're watching this pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's kind of logical when you think of it. That would be the pattern for 4. Or you might, if you want to be strict about it, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. But that's the beat pattern. Now 5 beats is tricky. 5 beats, you start using flourishes, and those flourishes are like this. This is 1, 2, 3, swing over to the other side, 4, and back up, and that's 5. I don't see much music that's really 5 beats to a measure, but it does exist. Down is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if I'm not looking at it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's the way I would do it for 5 beats. 6 beats, it gets to be a little complicated. And you can see 1, 2, 3, swing over to the other side, 4, add another circle, 5, and 6. So if I'm going to be doing this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's the way it is. And you can just learn the beat patterns, and you could, he's not just, a conductor's not going to sit here and just do this, unless he's doing a fast waltz or a fast march, and he only wants to beat either 1 beat to the measure or 2 beats to the measure. If something's fast, you cut down on the beat patterns, because otherwise it gets to look ridiculous and you would get very tired. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now an orchestra is going to recognize this immediately. They know what those beat patterns are. And so they're used to seeing conductors follow them. Some conductors follow them very, very well. And so you know exactly what beat you are, even in a measure. Without saying anything, a conductor can tell you pretty much everything that's going on just by hand motions alone or cueing people in. So people get used to that. Some conductors are more liberal and they just do other things, you know, and they use different flourishes. But the best conductors, and we do have really good ones here, the best conductors are the ones that follow the beat pattern so that you can follow them exactly and know exactly what they want. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's about as complicated as it gets. So the conductor comes in and he raises his hands, and that's an upbeat. And then he starts, and then now if there's an introduction, some songs have introductions, and the introductions, and I guess I'm going to show you that now. Let me put up a piece of music. I'll take this down. Hope I don't lose it here. All right, now I'm going to show you an introduction. This is just a regular piece of music. I wrote this myself. This beginning can be an introduction because you can use the first 2 or 3 notes as an introduction. You don't have to, but you can. And then you can play that introduction on an upbeat. You know, a conductor may hold his hands like this, and then he goes like this. That's the upbeat. You might be playing that introduction on the upbeat. And then the downbeat beat comes down with the rest of the music, so your downbeat is right here. Now I'll play this a little bit. I hope you can see the measure lines, because that's going to make it more clear. And this is just a little march that I wrote for the heck of it. Now, if I want to change something, this is the introduction. It's now a 3-beat introduction, and you notice that that's also a triplet. How do I know it's a triplet? It's got that little 3 on the top. That's a triplet. And so this starts it. It's really a part of the song, but it's considered to be the introduction to the song because it's the first 3 notes. And then you come to this next measure, and the downbeat is going to be on that measure. Now, if you look a little below, the way I've done it, this is going to be the upbeat where the conductor pushes his hands up in that kind of a motion that I showed you, and that will cover those 3 notes. And then the downbeat is going to come right here on this note here. So 1, 2, 3, 1, you know, upbeat, 1, downbeat. And when you get used to how a conductor does that, then that's fine. If I were working with a group of kids or maybe musicians that weren't, you know, they weren't highly developed, they hadn't had a lot of lessons, I might do a little extra thing. I might come out and I might, and I've done this, school concerts and so forth, I tap the music stand with my baton. Now, why? It just gets the kids' attention. Hold up the hands, and what I might do is I might count out the first measure. I might say, okay, here we are, and I wouldn't conduct it, but I might say 1, 2, 3, 4. That gives them the tempo. For people that are not professional or people, or if you wanted to change the tempo a little from what you conducted it before, you might want to make some changes. You could bring your hands up, and before you actually do any conducting, you'd say 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, and that's the tempo. That's how fast it's going to go. And then up with the music, and then the downbeat. And that's the way it is. So once you get used to what the conductor is doing, you know exactly what he's doing. You know exactly why he's doing it. And then he's going to motion you, do a lot of hand motions, louder, softer, come in. In other words, it's your turn. Point to them. It's your turn to come in. Now, in the Messiah, it's very interesting because the people are coming in and out all the time. You have sopranos singing all these amens, and then maybe the altos join them, but maybe not for a line or two. So you're conducting the sopranos, and then the alto comes in, you point to them, you bring them in. It's their turn to join. And then maybe the basses don't play anymore, you cut them off. So you see, it is a language in itself. It's a lot of fun to do it, but it's a lot of work. In order to conduct right, you really have got to know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're standing there doing this, which is not very helpful to an orchestra. It is true that the orchestra already knows the music because they've been rehearsing it. They've been rehearsing it in sectional meetings. They've been rehearsing it with the full orchestra. They probably already know the conductor, so they know the manner in which he works, because every conductor has his own kind of style. You know, so he knows, you know everything, what the conductor is going to do, but still watching the conductor is critically important because it's not unusual that they might change something, have it a little louder because the people are absorbing so much sound because there are so many people in an audience. It needs to be louder to compensate for that. Or there's an echo somewhere. You need to compensate for that. There's such a thing as resonance. If I'm playing, let's say I was playing a drum. I'm not, but supposing I'm playing a drum, and I start beating on the drum. There are 3 drums in the corner that aren't being used and nobody's playing them. They start playing on their own. They start vibrating on their own at the same tune as what I'm playing. If it were a kettle drum, if I were playing, because kettle drums can be tuned up, you actually can play notes on them. If one kettle drum is playing a certain note because someone's playing it, then another drum across the hall may also vibrate to that same frequency. And if it vibrates to that same frequency, you're going to get the same tone. So it's not too unusual as you're playing that other instruments that aren't being played at all, if they're anywhere around and they catch that frequency, start to vibrate to it, and then you get sounds from them as well. So, and that has to be compensated for. You know, if that's the way it is, sometimes you might have to bring an instrument off the stage and put it in a back room somewhere, because it's really playing everything that everybody else is playing, because it's vibrating to the same frequency. So there is a science behind all of this. And when the purpose of rehearsals is this all has to be worked out. Then you have the people running the sound system. And you have the microphones. How do you adjust the microphones? You have to have a good balance between what people are playing, so one part of the orchestra doesn't sound way too loud and screechy for the rest of the orchestra. And then a soloist comes in, the sound has to be adjusted because that's one voice or one instrument that's playing. A lot of little funny things happen. I was at a Boston concert. It was Boston Pops, I think. And Arthur Fiedler was the conductor. He was a wonderful conductor. And they had a young trumpet player there, and he was doing a solo. The song started out with a trumpet solo. He was so nervous. He was young, he was a good trumpet player, but he was so scared. You could tell he's shaking. You could actually see him physically shaking. So Arthur Fiedler decides to try to calm him down. So he puts one hand, the hand that would normally be using for signaling different things, not the beat pattern, which is done by the right hand usually, unless the conductor is left-handed, and then maybe it's reversed. But he's conducting with the beat pattern, and instead of signaling and doing all the things a conductor has to do, he puts his hand on the young man's shoulder, and he holds it there and just conducts with the one-hand beat pattern for the entire song. And the guy finally got through it. He cracked a few notes. He did all right. He cracked a few notes. He was just terrified, absolutely terrified. And so, you know, there are little things that happen. I can remember I was singing as a soprano, and I was behind a violinist, an elderly violinist. And she was a very, very elegant person. Very elderly, very elegant. And, of course, at the performance, she was all dressed up. We were all dressed up. And she has her hair in back with a bow. Well, the bow started getting loose. Every time she shook her head or did something where her head was going to be shaking, the bow would start to wiggle. Well, it struck me so funny, I couldn't take it. And I started giggling. And then I poked the person who was singing beside me, look at the bow. And then she starts laughing. Pretty soon we've got a whole row of people that are laughing. The audience doesn't know what we're laughing at. So you get little incidences like that. Conductors will sometimes lose a baton. It'll fly up on them. I already told you in the segment before this how it hit a chandelier and broke the chandelier. In one case, a conductor lost a baton, and it dived and went right into one lady's hairdo. I mean, so funny little things can happen. The one thing that musicians should never, 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 never do, and I want to make an issue of this, do not tap your feet to keep time, because the stage that you're on, if you're in an orchestra, acts like a sounding board, and it'll start to vibrate. And pretty soon people are not only listening to the music, but they're listening to thump, 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 if everybody's tapping their feet. And it really destroys the music, because you're listening more to the tapping of feet than you are to the music. So when I teach kids, if you want to practice at home and you need to tap your foot, kind of wiggle your toes and make it practically not noticeable, because you don't want to be pounding on the floor with your heel when people should be listening for your music and not what your beat pattern with your feet is. So I think we've pretty much run out of time. I don't know what else I want to tell you. I think I've gone through most of it. You have the beat patterns, the thing just, and I'll mention it quickly, musicians come in, they sit down, they tune up. The lights dim. The conductor comes in separately or with his, by himself or with his soloist. He goes up. He may say something to the audience, raises his hand for the first song, and believe it or not, orchestras have librarians. And the librarians are responsible for ordering the music and putting the right music on the right stand so that an oboist doesn't get a cello music, and all in the right order. So they don't have to flip around and make sure that their music is in the right order or they have the right parts. Music librarians take care of that for them. Although it's a wise idea to check when you sit down to make sure you've got all the music that you need and that somebody didn't make a mistake somewhere. Well, we're out of time, and I hope you've enjoyed this and learned a little bit about conducting. It is a fascinating study. And join me next time, and we'll be doing something else.